Hello and welcome to Dialogue. I'm Yang Rui in Beijing. A landmark plenum of the Chinese Communist Party decides to establish Mr. Xi Jinping as the core of this generation of the Chinese leadership. The four-day session, which was concluded on Thursday, aims to strengthen discipline of the 88 million-strong CPC to prepare a peaceful rise of China and the decisive leadership change at the 19th National Congress of the CPC Central Committee 1 year from now. What does the high-handed anti-graft campaign mean for the sustainable governance of this biggest ruling party in the world? And how do we look at the edge of China's development mode? Joining me today are Victor Gaojikai, Director of the National Association of International Studies, and Edward Lehman, Managing Director of Lehman, Lee & Xu. But before we begin our discussion, let's take a look at this.
A highly anticipated meeting concludes. Almost 400 party leaders took part in the 6th plenum of the 18th Central Committee held in Beijing. At the end, a communique was released outlining the future development of China's ruling party. It stressed unity, calling on all members to closely unite around the CPC Central Committee with Comrade Xi Jinping as the core, while underlining the importance of collective leadership. The country's robust anti-corruption campaign was another major topic discussed. Leaders approved the norms of political life and regulations on inter-party supervision. It comes at a time of expanding membership and rapid and profound social transformation. Delegates said they would address election malpractice and put an end to the buying and selling of official posts and vote rigging. Personnel change also took place. The meeting endorsed the decisions to expel 4 former senior officials from the party, while 2 new members have been added to the Central Committee. And the meeting decided that the 19th CPC National Congress would take place in the second half of 2017.
Gentlemen, what do you think are the most important deliverables coming out of this just concluded 6th plenum of the 18th National Congress of the CPC, Victor?
Thank you very much. The 6th plenum, as it turned out, will be considered as a major landmark event in the Communist Party of China's history, mainly because it not only made it clear that General Secretary Xi Jinping is now declared as the core of the CPC Central Committee, by which he is now becoming the core of the Communist Party of China. And it also tried its best and tried to institutionalize all the checks and balances that the Communist Party, the ruling party in China, can come up with to deal with corruption. So going forward, dealing with corruption will no longer be a case-by-case situation dealing with individual corrupt officials, but it has been elevated to the institutionalized checks and balances against corruption in China. Now, the third point, which is not talked about a lot in public, is that the 6th plenum is the major event which will lay the groundwork for the 19th Party Congress, which is expected to take place either in October or November 2017. And this will very much boil down to the major personnel appointments, potential changes of the structure, the size of these bodies, the Central Committee, the Politburo, or the Standing Committee of the Politburo. This is truly a historical moment in China, in the Communist Party of China, and it may actually have reverberations and implications for years, if not 1 or 2 decades to come.
Edward, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, no, most certainly. I mean, as an outside observer, one has to understand Chinese government, one has to understand the plenary sessions. And I think for Americans or for people watching around the world, it's very difficult to understand that these sessions are an indication, like Victor said, about what the future is going to bring. And it doesn't always seem so...
Excuse me, are you talking about the issue of transparency concerning leadership change in CPC?
Well, no, I think, like he said, what Victor said, with the core, the idea, the core was initially used by Deng Xiaoping, and then it was to describe Mao Zedong, then later to describe him, and then Jiang Zemin. So I think this idea of core leader that's also going to be setting the stage for a longer period of time, I think that's what I mean is more important. But I do think there's more transparency.
Well, public opinions are quite divided debate, not only within this country of China, but in the national society at large as to the issue of transparency concerning power transfer, leadership changes, as well as inter-party democracy. Now, Victor, the issue is why some of the skeptical observers in the West tend to compare the core leadership of the CPC to what they call strongman politics.
Well, on the one hand, if we trace back to recent history, when Mr. Jiang Zemin was the party secretary, he was declared as the core of the Central Committee. And since he retired in 2002 as the General Secretary, 2003 as the Chinese President, and then 2004 as the Chairman of the Central Military Commission, his successor in these three major positions, Hu Jintao, was never declared as the core of the Central Committee of the Communist Party of China, even though he carried the positions of the President of the People's Republic, the General Secretary of the Communist Party of China, and the Chairman of the Central Military Commission. And don't forget, this year is already the 4th year of President Xi Jinping's leadership. He became the General Secretary in 2012. And he was not declared as the core. So by definition, there was confusion in the party and in China at large as to who is the core of the leadership.
Excuse me, but British media, for example, says he's been the core years ago without being declared as such.
Exactly.
So why do you think an important legal document has been approved this time around by the plenum to make it very clear he's the core?
I think this declaration is very important in the sense that everyone within the party now knows that President Xi Jinping is the core, and whoever who was the core before was no longer the core either in 2002 or 2003 or 2004, and this really clarifies things, and it is good for the Communist Party of China's membership to know which direction to go, where is the real power concentration and powers. And this has nothing to do with the strongmanship, for example, because
for the second
this
point,
brings clarity to the leadership.
Edward, for the second point, in his first response to my question about the deliverables, he mentioned institutionalized checks and balance within the Communist Party of China. Your understanding, please.
Yeah, my understanding is that there's going to be intra-party discipline and intra-party rules of order and how things are predicated. A lot of this was ambiguous, and so this is going to become more clear. I think, like Victor said, one is establishing as a core, and I think a lot of times when I think about our British friends with people in the West, we mistake modernity or Western civilization with thinking forward. This is a different kind of a philosophy, which was to follow on what he said, which is a lot of times power is behind the veil in an Asian setting, a lot of times, not just China, but other places. Coming forward and saying this is indeed the core, there is no something behind the veil, and that this is going to be a more transparent, and this is going to be, it's going to go from dare not to be corrupt to actually saying zero tolerance for corruption, and so that I think that's important.
Some of the international observers went as far as to point out during the administration of Hu Jintao, who was never declared a core of the communist leadership, he was in the name chairman of the Central Military Commission, but everybody understands what was really happening in terms of the power structure there before and ahead of the 18th National Congress. So up to 95 generals have fallen disgracefully since the start of the anti-corruption campaign that was launched by Xi Jinping. That is unprecedented. The velocity, the dynamics, the momentum, you name it, concerning the anti-corruption campaign. I mean, it's been unprecedented. Does it have anything to do with the establishment of real authority within the Central Military Commission, instead of dividing the power between someone behind the curtain, the bamboo curtain, and someone in the name?
Well, to the rest of the world, they may believe that China is a very powerful country, relatively speaking monolithic in the power leadership, etc. In reality, it's not the same case. In reality, over the past 10 years or so, we see the central leadership, for example, a little bit being fragmented. Certain retired leaders continue to hold a tremendous tremendous amount of power over many, many important issues.
Victor, can you remember effectively the hallmark slogan of Mr. Hu Jintao? He said, let's have no flip-flop. 不折腾. I mean, yeah. I mean, 不折腾 did trigger a lot of public debates as to the implications of this policy option. Now, I'd like to have your take. Now, first of all, Edward, you are an overseas observer.
Yeah.
Now, what's your understanding of a 不折腾, no flip-flop?
Yeah, I mean, it's trying to keep one pathway and going forward would be my interpretation of it. I mean, but again, I think that what there was with that was he was carrying on from someone else. I would assume that there's no flip-flop with regards to going forward, and that was his heritage. I mean, Victor, of course, is
and the twin sister of this hallmark policy and leadership was harmonious construction, a harmonious picture. Harmony is, I'm afraid, one of the most oft-quoted words in his political vocabulary of Mr. Hu Jintao. So now I'd like to have your comments on the twin sister of both no flip-flop and harmony.
I think harmony as a goal is a very much worthy goal, and we need to spare no efforts in achieving harmony, not only in China but possibly throughout the world. However, to achieve harmony is easier said than done, and you really need to have enough way to wield your power in such a way to serve the ultimate interests of the people, and you need to have institutional backup when you exercise top leadership as the paramount leader in China. And if there are checks and balances against you in such a way that the power is not as it should be embedded, and other people after retirement are not in the office of these government positions can wield extraordinary amount of power disproportional to their political positions, for example, then you actually may create a situation of eventual paralysis of the power structure in China. This is what the sixth plenum wants to deal with. And I think by declaring Xi Jinping as the core of the Central Committee and the core of the Communist Party of China brings out all the clarity, and people know where loyalty should be dedicated.
Victor, well said. I was doing homework about how Western media looks at the outcome of the sixth plenum, and some said wisely that the previous administration under Mr. Hu Jintao was based on consensus building. The power was actually divided not quite in an even way, but between several big leaders. It's based on the principle of a consensus building, not necessarily having the paramount leader or the core leadership. So from the Western perspective, they say, well, this is not very bad because you have check and balance. I mean, it's not just one person who has the final say all the time on all the critical issues. What do you think of the pros and cons concerning the power mechanism?
Yeah, no, I mean, I see the value of trying to have harmony, but then the question is, how does one implement harmony? And even in the American election now, that one of the candidates was talking about this idea that China can do some great things because of the way the system is set up. They can make decisions. We're going to build the Olympic Stadium. We're going to do these kind of things, and there isn't a lot of feedback from the population who owns facilities in that area. So there's tremendous strides with that, but if you're always trying to strive for harmony, it's extremely difficult to try to get all parties to be able to move forward on something. And I think what the leaders have done here in what Xi Jinping has done in this particular case is saying, I'm the leader, I want everyone responsible from the top to the bottom, whether you're on a national level or you're on a provincial level or county level, and this example is going to go, and there's going to be nowhere to hide and nowhere to run.
Victor, do you think by saying no flip-flop, Mr. Hu Jintao would actually be portrayed by some who were critical and skeptical as a nice man? Chinese law holder. I mean, that's a sensitive issue, but I'll get back to you to hopefully get your answer after the short break. You're watching Dialogue with Victor Gao-Zhikai and Edward Lehman. We are discussing the outcome of the recently concluded 6th plenum of the 18th National Congress of the CPC. It's a landmark conference. Draconian regulations have been promulgated to make sure that the party building will guarantee the success of China's peaceful rise. We'll be back to discuss these and other issues. Please stay tuned. tough measures have been rolled out one after another to crack down on the corrupt apparatus, bureaucratic apparatus, the overstaffed bureaucratic apparatus. Now, this has unfortunately caused the alleged inaction and low morale for many of the local government officials who were regarded as the pillar in shoring up the local economic performance. Now, without their support, we would not have been able to enjoy the robust growth, double-digit growth for years, since the late 1970s. So what do you think of the consequences arising from the tough anti-corruption campaign?
Well, there have been complaints for the last 4 years or so in China in certain quarters of the political sector, complaining that the anti-corruption campaign has been overdone. And one spillover from the anti-corruption campaign is the loss of efficiency in the Communist Party of China or in the state-owned sector, resulting eventually in the loss of high growth in China. But I think these criticisms or complaints are completely misplaced. Why? Because if China does not go full head and to the hilt in terms of fighting against corruption, the survivability and the sustainability of the party or the political system of China as a country may be in danger. Therefore, I think at whatever cost, the party need to go full hill to fight against corruption, and also once there is a better environment of transparency, of well-governed party and the government officials, for example, we will have a more bounce back in the economic life. So I think the question is not whether we want to have higher growth versus whether we want to have fight against corruption. We want both. We want to have anti-corruption being carried on a sustainable basis, and we want to have a government in effective exercise of its functions and the economy in good and resilient growth mode again.
Yeah, certainly the idea of fighting against the four winds, which is formalism, bureaucracy, hedonism, and extravagance. I mean, that's exactly the core thing. Why have these large meals? Why have these extravagant events? Why overindulge when you're trying to bring money in? Just do business. I think that's the message from that, and I think that was brought up in 2012, 2013, and then this is really the implementation of that, and this is, I think it's going to get clearer and clearer, but I think one is to establish the core, two is to say these are the four wins that we would like to get rid of, and then now this is the mechanism to be able to do it from the top down. So you've got 88.1 million people in the Communist Party. 1 out of 15 Chinese are in the Communist Party. This is a message to a group of leaders, whether you're in business or whether you're in the bureaucracy or in the government, whatever it is. This is a message to this very large group of leaders in the country. And
Edward and Victor, let's take a look at some of the official rhetoric that's been used over and over in the legal document, the statement that were released in the wake of the 6th plenum. The four kinds of consensus or public awarenesses, 看齐意识、政治意识、大局意识, and whatever, the four kinds of awareness. So what do you think of, first of all, the political awareness, 政治意识, and the awareness of core leadership, and the holistic perception about the leadership, 大局意识, and what else? So what do you think?
No, I think even though the rest of the world may not fully understand the political reality in China, the reality is that there is a little bit of confusion. For example, whether I should swear allegiance to the new leadership or the retired leadership, for example, whether things have been done on such a way, for example, wining and dining on a massive scale, high level of extravagance and inflated numbers, for example, whether these should be taken for granted or should be considered as a norm, or there is a better norm. There is a better way to build up China as a great power. There is a need for greater transparency and clarity. There should be a better mission, well dedicated and well defined, to serve the ultimate interest of the people. Now we know, after 4 years of intense inter-party campaign against corruption, that definitely there is a better way to build up China, there is a better way to run the Communist Party of China, and there is a vision and a mission to serve the ultimate interests of the people. And I think this is a great contribution of President Xi Jinping and inner circles around him, because this is a very important turnaround in the paradigm of
many
way of
observers,
thinking.
Edward, many observers at home and abroad pointed out that what Mr. Xi Jinping has been doing since the 4 years in the highest office is to establish authority and to draw red lines for the corrupt government officials. You got to stop here. You got to the buck stops here in his office. So then this is called by the Western media, or by even our own media, the party building, which is both a prelude to nation making and lays groundwork for the process of modernization in China, to ensure peaceful rise and tell a good story about China's success. So what do you think of the issue of a party building? What does that involve from your perspective?
Well, I mean, party building, I mean, when you think about it,
I don't want you to compare the bipartisan wrangling between Republicans and Democrats in the current presidential race. I mean, that dogfight between Hillary and Donald Trump,
that would
a lot
be
of
very
debates,
difficult to do. But at the same time, I think that if you want to look at the governance, it's essentially it's run by the party, and one needs to understand the party and party building in order to understand where the government's going to be going. So I think this is very important. I mean, what is going to happen in the future, and that's what party building is. So there's been a lot of unsettling things. There's been some stuff on the press. There was a documentary that had, a 6-part, 8-part series talking about government officials and sort of popularizing this idea that they were, that they were actually punished for what they have done. And I think that's a message to the young people, and it's a message to people all around the country, in the world, that sort of stuff is not going to be tolerated. But unless you have a pipeline of people that are going to be loyal to Xi Jinping and his ideas, you have to have party building, whether it would be in the United States or here. And so that's a core focus. And that's the question. I mean, right now is when the appointments and whatnot are being made, and they want to probably have people that are going to be listening to that going forward for the 19th.
Some of those who followed the sixth plenum pointed out, well, many of the draconian regulations concerning the discipline that asks the party members, whose number is put at 88 million, that's a huge number, by the way. It means that you have to eat less, you have to stay at home with your friends, with your family, no, with your wife, with your family, instead of eating out every day. It's part of the corruption, right? So wives are grateful, by the way, that their husbands can come back without having to have dinners. With regard to party building, don't you think without the proper reward mechanism to motivate government officials and senior executives of the SOE sector, simply by releasing tough regulations, these observers say, you go back to the 1950s, 60s, and 70s. The external and internal circumstances have changed tremendously, with the market forces being the driving force. You got to be rewarded for your good performance. Now, simply strengthening the discipline is good. It's an integrity of the party, an important part of the party building. But what do you think of the reward mechanism?
Indeed, that is a very important issue we need to address. During the revolutionary year, for example, before the founding of the People's Republic in 1949,
the reward system
you are right.
The
CPC
is
spiritual.
No longer a revolutionary party.
Exactly.
It is a ruling party.
Exactly. However, if, for example, the presumption is that if I join the party, if I become a government official, a party official, etc., that's a sure recipe for me to enrich myself. That's a sure recipe for me to abuse my power, to plunder the public wealth, and my families and my cronies, for example, my friends and relative circle, can enrich themselves in an obscene amount. That's the wrong presumption. And I think the better assumption is that the government is there to serve the people, the party is there to serve the people, and if you really...
Wholeheartedly, unconditionally,
exactly. And if
like what JFK said, don't ask what the country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country.
Yeah.
Exactly. That's a matter of making sacrifices.
Absolutely. And if you hold amount of power, or very high level of power, it's not an enabler for you to plunder the public coffer. It is enabler for you to exercise great leadership in a dignified way to serve the ultimate interest of the people. That presumption needs to be rewritten, and I think the sixth plenum is taking a big step in the right direction, telling everyone of the Communist Party of China membership, 88 million, as you just now mentioned, that, forget about your old presumption. Don't pretend that if you are a government leader and party leader, you can enrich yourselves or your family members. It is the wrong presumption, and we have a better assumption. And I think this will really rally the people behind the central leadership, and people will have greater trust in the survivability and the sustainability and the integrity of the party and the government.
Right. Meritocracy is, of course, an important part for holding the party together, for the promotion of government officials, and that's a barometer for your office performance. Now, having said this, what can we do, Edward and Victor, to put the market force, the reward mechanism, with the disciplines and the spirit of sacrifice?
Well, I think, the whole idea is to
as
catch,
a civil servant.
Well, it's to catch a spirit. It's a new revolution. It's a revolution about making China a great nation and having people that want to participate in the party, in ruling this great country on all levels, participating not to enrich themselves, like Victor said, which was the old paradigm perhaps, but actually to do it because they want to make China great. And I think the checks and balances are going to be the details that were written, that have recently been written, and that there's going to be a strengthening from both the top down, which is the core, but also there's going to be something happening from the bottom up as well. And so that people are going to participate because they want to make China a great nation, not just because they want to enrich themselves personally.
Well, both Hillary and Donald says they want America to be great again. It's their American dream, the American story, but we're going to present the China story, our own way.
Yeah, the China dream. That's
the China dream. So, do you think the current anti-corruption campaign is sustainable?
I hope so, and I believe so, because if China stops or suspends the anti-corruption campaign, the evils of the old paradigm may actually bounce back again with revenge and a retaliation against this new crop of leadership in China. And I think if that ever happened, it will really dash the hope and the confidence of the people in the Communist Party of China and in the regime in itself, and China may actually head towards great disaster.
We've been talking about the inter-party supervision and oversight. What about the supervision from outside and a more sort of independent and aggressive media that does not have from the Western perspective, it does not have party affiliation or whatever. So what do you think, very quickly?
Yeah, I think there's a soft sort of movement happening already. It's happening in a very small way with regards to people being able to be vocal on social media now in a modest way, in a small way, and in a collected way, in a way that works for China. So I believe the media, of course, being full on and open and every single way probably isn't good for any country. But I think that there's enough satisfaction with people being able to express themselves, amongst their friends, a small group of friends is okay. So I think that there's an outlet certainly here now, and people are enjoying it.
Right. Perhaps we have developed our own understanding about modernity and modernization in improving governance of the country and the party building. Thank you very much for being part of this meaningful dialogue. I'll see you next time. Until then, goodbye.